Alright everyone, welcome back to another Unity video. Today we are going to be going over how to get our animations running for our sprites. So this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy one because there's a lot of steps that we have to take into consideration. So make sure you are following along closely and you are taking your time to pause the video, make sure you're getting every little detail as we go along. Don't rush through it. So where we left off, we have our tile sets and our character here, and he can move around and jump, but it doesn't have any animations, and he's not able to face the right direction based on where we are moving. So the very first thing that we are going to do is we are going to fix that. We are going to allow our character to face the direction that we are moving in. So right down here under for me, what is line 36, I'm going to add a couple of new conditionals to check to see which way our horizontal input is going, and then based on that value, we are going to move or we're going to flip our character on the x-axis. So first thing I'm going to do is put in a conditional to check to see if horizontal input is less than 0. If it is, I want to transform the scale, the local scale specifically, of my sprite. I want to flip it on the x-axis. So in order to do that, I'm going to say transform dot local scale, and I'm going to set this equal to a new vector 3. In this case, I'm going to set this to -1, 1, and 1. So this is what will allow me to flip our sprite in the opposite direction. And then after this, I'm going to add an else if statement that states the following. Oops. Else if horizontal input is greater than 0, I'm going to transform dot local scale. Again, set this to a new vector 3, and we are going to set this equal to 1, 1, 1. So we'll be facing the right direction if we are moving forward versus backwards. So let's go ahead and save this. Let our scripts compile. And let's go ahead and click play. And we should, if everything went well, yep, our character now faces the direction that we are moving in. We are on our way to having a successful animation. So let's click out of this. So next, let's actually start adding animations to our player character using our sprite sheet. So first thing I need to do is I need to make sure that my player game object is selected. And while this player game object is selected, I'm going to go to Window, Animation, and open up the Animator window. Or I'm sorry, whoops, not the Animator. We're going to get there eventually. I'm moving a little ahead. Animation, Animation. And I'm going to bring this and just have it sit right here on my bottom row. And I'm going to take my project tab and I'm going to bring it up here actually, because I want to be able to click and drag my sprites into our animation clip here. So we're going to create an animation clip by clicking create. So we have our, we're inside of our art folder. And what I want you guys to do is go ahead and create a new folder while you're doing this for animation specifically. So you can just right click, create new folder, and give it the name of animation. Go into that folder And this is where we're going to be saving our animations. So to start off, I'm going to make our idle animation. I'm going to call this player idle. Guess I should use proper camel case. I'll start with lowercase p and then capital I. Click on save, and you can see here that we have created a new player idle animation that is right here, and we are going to bring in our sprite images into this animation. Now, one thing I want to note, you may not see this samples input field right here. If you do not see the samples input field, you can enable it by clicking on these three dots right here and making sure show sample rate is enabled. Perfect. With that enabled, you'll be able to see the sample rate because we are going to need to change the sample rate. This controls how many frames are played per second. So let's go ahead and create our idle animation. So in our sprite sheet, I'm going to select all of the frames that make up our idle animation. So that's going to be these 4 frames right here. I'm going to select this, hold down shift, right click. All the frames have been selected. I'm going to click these or drag them in right here. And you can see that we now have keyframes for each of these images. So if I preview this right now, in order to preview an animation, you need to make sure that the player game object is actually selected. You're going to click play. You can see this is moving like crazy fast. That is because our samples are set to 60. So essentially what's that saying is like play, 60 frames per second. So it's going through all of these, really quickly. We want to change this because we want our animation to last longer. So I'm actually going to bump this all the way down to 6. And you can see now we are playing a frame approximately every second. So now if I preview this, you can see our character has a much more realistic, movement that makes sense for the type of animation that we have. So I'm just going to stop that preview right there. We have one of our animations done. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the animations for each of our states. So we need one for running, jumping, and our hurt frame. So let's go ahead and do that. To do that, I'm going to click player idle, this little drop down here, and I'm going to create new clip. And this is going to create a new animation, and I'm going to go ahead and call this one player run. Click on save, and we're just going to do the same exact thing as we did before. I'm going to find our run animation, which should be somewhere around here. Here it is. It's going to be these 3 frames here, and I'm just going to click, drag them in, and you can see we have the same issue. It's moving really fast. Bump this down to 6, and now we got a much more nice and realistic animation going. So there we go. That one's done. Player run. Create another new clip. We're going to do the same thing for our jump. Call this player jump. Click on save. Let's find our jumping frames, which is going to be from here to here. I'm going to drag them in. I'm going to do the same exact thing, set this to 6. Now with jumping, it's a little bit different. So we could do one of 2 things. We could create a animation for the rising of our jump and the falling of the jump. But for the sake of time and saving on, some certain levels of complexity, we are just going to pad out the timing of the jump so that it just looks like we have that effect just by it, taking its time, when we hit jump, and once we get to the top of the jump, and when we start descending, the animation will play all the way through on the, by the time it takes for us to complete our jump, it will complete the animation. So we're going to use time to create that illusionary effect of having an individual animation for rising and falling. So here's our jump animation, and this will make more sense and look better once we actually have, all of our animators working with our movement. And I'm going to create the last one, create new clip. I'm going to call this player hurt. Make sure I capitalize the H. Save. And let's bring in those last 2 frames. right here. Again, setting this to 6, and there we go. We have our hurt frames. Perfect. So we've created all of our animations. So if we go to our animation folder now, you're going to see 5 different things. You're going to see each of our individual animations, and then you're also going to see our player animator. So if I double click this and open it up, you can see it opens up an animator tab up here. You can see a list of all of our individual animations, and it's went ahead and created a transition, which is this line right here, a transition from entry into player idle. What this means is that player idle is our default animation, which is perfectly acceptable. We want our idle animation to be our default. But for whatever reason, if we wanted something different, we could change that. We could just simply right click one of these other animations and set as layer default state. Just FYI. But we do want player idle as our default animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to start adding transitions from these different spots so that we can actually change our animations based on what the character is doing. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create our first transition from player idle to player run. And we're going to need to do a few things to make this work properly. So what you need to do is go ahead and click on the transition here by clicking on the arrow. And what we're going to do is create a condition. That is going to tell Unity to transition to this animation based on a specific condition. And we want that condition to be based on how quickly the player character is moving. If it is moving faster than 0, essentially, we want our animation for our run to kick in. So in order to do that, we need to create a parameter. This is the thing that we are going to keep track of specifically. So we're going to click on our parameters tab right here, and we're going to create a new parameter by clicking on the plus sign. And since I want to keep track of our player character's speed, I'm going to create a new float parameter. So I'm going to name this, actually I'm just going to call this speed with a capital S. Just going to call it speed, default value set to 0. And now with my transition selected, I'm going to go to the conditions tab here and I'm going to create a new condition. And I'm going to say if speed is greater than, and we're going to give this a very small value, like 0.01 for example. If speed is greater than 0.01, we are going to transition into our run animation. So there's a couple of other things that we have to change here. So when we're doing 2D animations, we don't really need to worry about proper transitions of keyframes from one animation to the other. That is mostly reserved for 3D games. So in our particular case, we just want our run animation to start immediately. As soon as our speed has crossed that threshold of 0.01, we want the run animation to start. So to make that happen, we're going to turn off has exit time, and we are going to change our transition duration from 0.25 to 0. So this means it is going to start immediately. So now what we need to do is switch from our run animation back into our idle if the player decelerates to a certain point. So if I select player run, make a transition into player idle, and I select that transition, we're going to do the same exact thing, but the opposite. I'm going to create a condition for speed, and we're going to say if it's less than 0.01, we will go into our idle animation. Same kind of rules apply. We don't want exit time, and we want to change the transition from 0.25 to 0. Perfect. So we now have our idle and run animation. But if I go ahead and preview this, we're going to see that the running animation doesn't actually do anything because we are not keeping track of our speed within our movement script. So we need to keep track of our speed, and then we need to transition to or reference the speed parameter from our animator. So let's go ahead and go over how to do that. So in our hierarchy here, go ahead and click on the player game object and notice that a new component has been added to our player game object, and that is of an animator. So what we can now do inside of our script is reference this animator to trigger certain transitions to occur based on things that are happening within our script. So go ahead and open up your platformer movement script, and we're going to add a couple of things to this to make this work. So the first thing we need to do is keep track of our speed. So first thing that we need to do is add this script right here that I have on line 13. We need to be able to reference the parameters of the animator. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a public variable called animator and set it equal to, or give it just the name of animator. And with that, what I can do is if I go now back into our script here, so what you're going to do is just click and drag the animator component right into the animator public variable. And that will now allow us to reference this animator specifically within our script, which is exactly what we're going to do. So now that we are able to do that, we need to then start keeping track of our movement speed. So let's do that. So up here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a float that I'm going to give the name of horizontal movement, and I'm going to set this equal to just 0. It's a float, so we need to end with the letter F. And now what I'm going to do inside of our update method is reference our horizontal movement and use that to reference our character animator. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm inside of our update method, I'm going to update horizontal movement. And I'm going to set this equal to our horizontal input. So input dot get access, just like we did in the line above to get our horizontal input that we then use for something else. Get access horizontal. And now what I want to do is, in order for me to keep track of our move speed, I need to multiply this value by our move speed. So we are going to reference our move speed variable. And there we go. So now I have a variable that is only keeping track of my move speed specifically. I can't use the move vector variable that we created because the script that I'm about to show you cannot take a vector and change it into a floating value. So let me show you what I mean. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference the animator just by simply calling the animator name. I'm going to say animator dot set float, and we are going to specifically be targeting the parameter of the animator that we created earlier, which, if you recall, was speed. So we want to set the value of that parameter using our movement speed. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm just simply referencing that parameter name, and what I'm going to set that equal to is our horizontal movement. Horizontal movement. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out. We're going to notice something strange happens here. Okay, so you can see our run animation works when we are moving forward but however, it doesn't work when we're moving backward. And that is because when we're moving backward, our movement speed is actually negative as opposed to positive. So in order to fix that, we need to use a built-in method called mathf dot abs for absolute. And so essentially what this is doing is just taking the value of horizontal movement, no matter what it is, and making sure it's a positive value. So mathf dot absolute horizontal movement. Hit save. Let this compile one more time. And let's go ahead and click play. And you can see that now my running animation works for both moving backwards and forwards. But we don't have our jumping working just yet, so we will get there. And now when I stop moving, we are going back into idle. So our animator over here is working perfectly. We are transitioning between idle and run effectively. So let me move this over here really quick so I can show you something. Notice how when I click play, you're going to see the different idle animations running. So this one is running through its animation right now, and as soon as I start moving, you can see player run is activating, and you can see our speed value is changing right here. And because of that math.absolute function that we added, even if I'm moving to the left or to the right, my speed is maintaining a max value of 5, which is perfect. That's exactly what we've assigned our speed to be. All right. So I'm going to move the animator back over here, stop playing, and let's move on. Okay. So now what we need to be able to do is transition, let me pull this over here like this, is transition from, or transition to, I should say, our jump animation. But what's different about this is that we want to be able to transition into our jump animation from no matter where we are in our animation cycle, whether we are idling or running, we want to be able to transition into player jump. So we are going to use this node right up here called AnyState. This is what's going to allow us to transition to jump no matter where we are. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make a transition from AnyState into player jump. And what we need to do is create a new parameter for this one, a parameter that we're going to call isJumping, so that we can keep track of whether or not the player is in fact jumping or not, something we are already doing in our script to determine if the player is touching the floor or not. So we're simply just taking that same idea and adding one more layer to it. We are checking to see if the player is jumping so that we can either determine to use the jumping animation or not. So let's create that new parameter. This time it's going to be a Boolean because we are either jumping or we're not jumping. It's one or the other. So we're going to create a new Boolean. I'm going to name this isJumping. Its default value is going to be set to false. So we're going to leave this unchecked. Checked means true, unchecked means false. So now I'm going to click on this transition here, and we're going to add our conditions to this. So it's going to be a few different things. We need to check to see if isJumping is false. So we're going to do the same thing, no exit time. We're going to change some settings. Our duration we are going to change to 0. And we're going to disable one more thing, which is can transition to self. So when using AnyState, if you leave this on, essentially what it's saying is that it is also going to transition to itself when it can. So by turning this off, it's going to allow the entire jump animation to complete. If we left this on, it would be restarting the jump animation over and over and over and over again. We don't want that. You are going to get this little warning here. Player jump in state, AnyState doesn't have an exit time or any condition. Don't worry about that. Let's move this over here. Actually, for this one, we just want, don't think we need this condition. I'm going to remove that for now. If we do need to add it, I'll bring it back. So now we're going to transition from player jump into player idle. So for this one, we are going to add the following conditions. First, I'm going to turn off exit time, turn off transition duration, or I should say set it to 0, and let's add our conditions. So we want to go into idle, if jumping is false and speed is less than 0.01, we want to go into our idle animation. And finally, we want to transition into run. This time we want to say if jumping is false and speed is greater than 0.01, we want to go into our running animation. Again, every transition we're turning off has exit time, and we are turning off or setting transition duration to 0. And then remember, from any state, we are turning off can transition to self. And we're going to save our player hurt animation for later once we actually add that mechanic to the game. So we will get to that point. So now what we need to do is go in and fix our movement script to take this all into account. So I'm going to scroll on down to where I have my jumping script, where I'm checking to see if is jumping is true, and down here where is jumping is false. So in order for our script to be able to reference these animation or these animator parameters, we need to change our custom on collision function or method that we created from private to public. That is the only way that our script is going to be able to reference these animator parameters, is if that is public. So we're going to start over here with our is jumping true. So we're going to do this just like the run animation. We're going to be referencing the animator, but this time, instead of setting float, the jumping parameter is a Boolean. So we're going to say set bool, and using the name of the parameter, which is jumping, we are going to set that equal to true. And then for our false state, I'm just going to copy that code, bring it right down here into our custom function. Remember, we changed this from private to public. And now I'm going to change this from true to false. So just very quickly to clarify, this variable is jumping is different than this. This is a parameter that is set within the animator. This is a variable that exists within our script. So this is jumping is referencing the is jumping parameter in our animator. This is jumping is referencing the variable that we created in our script called is jumping. All right. So I'm going to save this. Hopefully I didn't make a mistake, but we're going to find out momentarily. Go into our scene, click on play. Let's make sure everything's working. Oh, I did something wrong, so let's go back and see what happened there. Let's go into our animator. From our any state into player jump, I have a feeling this is where my mistake is. Okay, so I actually need to set the, oh, yeah, that would make sense. So any state into our jumping animation, we want that to happen if jumping is true. Okay, that would definitely help. So let's go ahead and click play. And now we should be good. Excellent. So I can move this way. And sure enough, when I jump, our jumping animation starts. And it actually looks pretty good. The timing actually is pretty decent. It makes sense with our jumping speed and how fast we are falling down to the ground. If you get to this point and you realize that your jumping animation looks a little off, what you can always do is just go into the animation tab, open up your player jump animation, and you can change that sample value to change the length of time that that animation takes to run. Okay, so this was a relatively lengthy one. You guys should be really proud that you made it this far and that you have your animation working. I hope you enjoyed the process of learning how to get animators working. This is definitely one of the things where there's a lot of steps, but the more practice that you have with it, the easier it will become, and then it starts just becoming second nature. So best of luck to you all. Good job, and we will see you in the next video.